Welcome back to another episode of Glasp Talk. Today, we are excited to welcome John Whaley, a visionary in the world of cybersecurity and AI. So, John is the founder of Inception Studio, a nonprofit community-driven accelerator focused on empowering the brightest minds in AI, as well as Redcoat AI, a company dedicated to protecting people from AI-enhanced social engineering attacks. So, with a PhD from Stanford and a track record of founding multiple successful companies like UnifyID and Moka5, John has been at the forefront of cutting-edge technologies, from programming, program analysis and optimization to virtualization and cybersecurity. So, and John is also a passionate educator and teaching courses at Stanford on building apps with LLMs, like large language models, and sharing his insights on next-gen AI technologies. So today, we'd like to ask him about what's happening in AI nowadays, and also how AI will impact our lives in the future. So thank you for joining today, John.
Yeah, great to be here. Yeah. So,
Thank you.
yeah, no, I mean, thanks for the introduction, right? And so yeah, and so I mean, I've been working, I don't know, I've been working in this space. I've been here in the Bay Area almost 25 years or so, like when I came here, like when I started at Stanford, right? And it's very interesting to kind of see all the different uh, waves of things that have happened since then. I remember kind of working in AI even before, like it was like this time it was like this called the AI winter. So everything is coming kind of full circle, and now AI has become so such a hot thing. It's very it's just very interesting to see. But like I've always been very technical and very much a builder. I think like there's even when I was doing my PhD at Stanford and I was planning to be a professor, even then, all of my research was about building things. And so my PhD research and everything was about, my research areas in compilers and program analysis. But all my research was about like how do you help like software engineers like build things faster and better and and provably correct and like those sorts of things. And so even all of my research was kind of very much engineering focused and always has been. So that's always been my background, in terms of very much being a builder, starting with kind of writing code and like and being a software engineer. And then eventually, and then later on, it was about doing research and helping other people to do that. Yeah, and then ultimately like building companies. And now I'm kind of at a meta level sort of because through Inception Studio, I help other people build companies. So it's been a lot of fun so far.
Oh, yeah. So first of all, yeah, I'm curious about Inception Studio. I know what is Inception Studio, but could you explain to the people who don't know about Inception Studio and what is Inception Studio and why did you start the project?
Yeah. So I mean, the backstory there is that my last company got acquired about almost 4 years ago, and I was looking for my next thing to do and not making a ton of progress because my life was just too comfortable. This is like in 2021, so it was like my, to 2022, and my, this is like we're still in the pandemic times and everything. And I was just kind of stuck. I knew I wanted to do another company, but and all of these things were happening with GPT-3 had come out in actually in 2020, and like we were, it seemed to do some pretty interesting things there. So we knew this was going to be big, but was not making much progress towards a company. And part of that is like I know myself, I'm very deadline driven. Like if I don't have a deadline, like nothing happens. Like I end up procrastinating and just not getting much done. And so I really needed to have a deadline there, and and I needed to. So I knew what I needed, which was like to go away somewhere to remove all my distractions, to be surrounded by other really smart, creative people, and then yeah, and most importantly, have a deadline, right? And so that was the genesis of the very first event we did was back in November 2022. The topic area was around large language models and generative AI. We got a bunch of really amazing founders there, And then quite a few companies like were either launched there or like kind of like ended up, just growing out of that, right? And which was really, that part was really exciting. And, part of the reflection there about why the first event had gone so well was that, we kept the quality bar really high and we were able to attract really, really good people who were there, right? And this was, and so when we thought about like we were doing more of these type of events, we wanted to keep that quality bar really high and avoid this problem of adverse selection where like the best people would kind of choose not to go. And so that's what we did. And then so we've run 12 of these events so far, like these cohorts of founders. We had 144 founders come through the program so far. And yeah, it's been very, very successful because it turns out when you curate a group of like really amazing people and put them all together, they end up people who are ready to start companies, they end up starting companies and like those companies end up doing extremely well. And so that is that's been the premise of what we're doing. We run this as a nonprofit. We don't take any equity in the companies, again, because we want to focus on quality and get the best quality people together. And yeah, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit. So like we ask people if they can donate, if they're able to, if they can donate just to cover their costs, like for the room and board and lodging, right? There and if they can't, then that's fine as well. Like we can waive the cost as well there. And and because of that, we've been able to attract some really, really great founders there, some like really good success stories so far have come out of Inception, right? But this is a really, really different model than you see from most of these other accelerators, which most of the time they're just looking for people who will take some type of deal, like I'll give up 7% of my company and then you have to pay 100, they'll pay like 125K for 7%, like that's a typical type of deal, or sometimes even more, up to 10% and such. Like that might work well for early stage, for first time founders, but if you are you work in a really hot space, or you are a serial entrepreneur that you've had success in the past, or you already have a lot of connections to investors, etc. Like people like that, they don't really need to join that type of accelerator program where they're giving up a lot. And so they have a problem with adverse selection problem where they're not able to attract the very best people. So we wanted to avoid that. That's why we don't take any equity. That's why we're a nonprofit. And that's why we've been able to attract some really, really amazing people. And there's inherent value in curating a group of amazing people and putting it all together. So now we've run 12 of these retreats. There's also a really strong founder community there as well. This is something I had never pegged myself as like kind of a community organizer type at all. But like it just kind of happened, which over time, just like that's been a really exciting part of that journey as well for me, like just kind of exploring that side of how to organize a community of founders, right? But yeah, it's been everything has been great so far. We're running another event. Our next event is coming up at the end of September in 2024, and we've run these events every 6 to 8 weeks now, and now we're talking about even kind of expanding internationally as well. We're starting to plan an event in Japan and like in other locations as well. So as the truth is that there are a lot of great founders in many different areas and many different walks of life, right? We also and I'm a big believer in like the best teams are the most diverse teams. And and so this is something that we put some conscious effort into when we think about when we're putting together the cohorts of people, like not just having all the same type of people, because if we did, like the event would not be as nearly as successful as it is, right? If we just had a bunch of engineers, it would just be like a hackathon, and then people would hack up some solutions, but they would never really turn into anything, because they wouldn't really turn into viable businesses, right? And then, but on the other hand, if it's like too much too many product managers together, then that's not going to turn into anything either, right? Like, or business people or any of these other areas, right? Actually, the worst case would be if it were all CEOs. That would be a disaster. We would be yes,
Yeah.
not want maybe that's more like a reality TV show or something. You're like not like that's not going to because that's the truth is you need all types. Like you need people who can be CEOs, you need people who are not CEOs, right? You need people who can be who are technical, you need people who understand product, you need people who can sell, like or understand go to market and all of this, and like ultimately the ones that have that kind of a good mixture of skills on the founding team or the early team is they are much more likely to be successful. I think, and this isn't I think there's statistically proven. I mean, you look at, there's a book that's called The Founder's Dilemma that kind of just goes into this in depth about like just analyzing what type of teams and founders of founding teams are more likely to be successful. And so like that one shows that like the ones that where there's some diversity on the early team are ones that are just statistically more likely to be successful. So we and then also just personally, like I hate these situations where if there's somebody who is they are talented and they are ambitious and like for the good of the world, like they have a destiny that they should be doing something, like should be starting a company, but because of circumstances outside of their control, like discrimination or just society and those type of things, like they're not able to fulfill their dream and their destiny, like that I just hate I hate those situations, right? And so like, and it makes me very much want to kind of fight and to support people that are in that type of situation. So we have so far I think Inception has been 25% women. It's like and we're working to try to increase that as well, because I believe that there's kind of many women who can and should be starting companies, and like because of a variety of reasons they have not been able to, but like we want to like help support that. And then also this is similarly kind of we're looking in Japan and other places as well, where it's like the entrepreneurship is maybe not as common, but there are a lot of very talented ambitious people, and like I want to do everything we can to support people in those circumstances as well.
Yeah, and I totally resonate with that. And by the way, I went to the cohort one, like a first pilot cohort, and that was amazing. But I don't know what's happening nowadays. This recent cohort. And have you found any like a interesting project or ideas in the past cohort?
Yeah, oh, there's so many. I mean, there's so. I mean, this is the benefit of like just. I mean, this is why I love doing this. Is like you get to interact with so many interesting people with different backgrounds, but they're all very ambitious and they're all very accomplished, and they're all like kind of been thinking about this for a while, and just just hearing about some of the very interesting things that people are doing. Now, we're not. The very first event we did, the one that you went to, was like explicitly there was a topic area of like large language models and generative AI. That was because we did it in November 2022. And this was about like 2 weeks before ChatGPT came out, right?
Good
And
timing.
yeah, and like very good timing there, right?
Yeah.
And the reality of it is that it is like it's not like we're just trying to restrict and focus only on AI, AI founders and everything. It's more of it's just a very hot area right now, and there's a lot of interest in it. There's this new capability called large language models in the past, and now it does, right? And it opens up so many new opportunities that I think it's natural that a lot of founders are just very interested in building using these tools and like in these areas, right? So it's not so because the danger is if you kind of start from Gen AI and you just start from, we have this amazing tool called GPT-4 or whatever, like any of them, called large language model, or some generative AI model, then you end up, it's like it's like a hammer that's like looking for nails, and then you end up, just not solving real problems for customers, right? And so I think it's much better to start from the problem, and then if AI is a solution, then that's great. But there's a lot of cases where AI is not actually the best solution, and that's fine as well. That being said, I would say, I don't know, most of the companies that we deal with, like through Inception, are not like fully embracing AI. And I think it's, not only in terms of like their product that they're doing, but also internally, for their company, because there's an opportunity now with like utilizing the latest tools and everything to basically, it's like a superpower. You can act like a much larger company with a much fewer people by leveraging a lot of these Gen AI tools, right? And to handle a lot of different things about your company. And yeah, and the people who are fully fluent in these tools are able to use them. Yeah, it's almost like a superpower right now, right? You get to end up being 5 or 10 times more productive than people who aren't using those tools, right? Or don't understand how to use those tools. So that has been a really interesting evolution, I guess, over the recent time. Like, it used to be that if you want to do this, you had to kind of scale up a pretty big team and like hire a bunch of people, and that's a lot less true now. Like, you can get away with like having just a much smaller team and just a smaller handful of people, and effectively like punch way above your weight if you really know how to use these tools effectively, right? So this is like, so when we talk about AI native companies, it's both in terms of like, yes, they're kind of building products that are AI native, and they have a data strategy that is, they have a strategy that understands about the value of data and all this, but they're also utilizing AI tools themselves within their companies to basically give them a huge competitive advantage compared to the larger companies that are not as closely embracing these type of tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I've seen, like in the past, I've seen, Friend or Memsero or CoFrame, those, many like interesting projects, came out from Inception Studio, and that's really impressive, by the way.
Yeah, no, we have a lot of great, and I could go through each of the companies, and I'm like actually very excited about each of them, for a variety of reasons. Yeah, Friend that was one of the first ones that we actually kind of start to get into the hardware space as well. This was this one was, there's been some high profile failures, I would say, in this space, where just products that like were released that were just not very good. That being said, I think there are I still think someone's going to crack it. There's going to be a lot of promise in that area, around those type of AI wearables. CoFrame is another one you mentioned, very interesting, exciting, and like this was the type of thing where Josh Payne, who was like with the founders, he came to our cohort 3 there, and when he we're talking about different ideas and everything, when he described the idea of what he's doing, which is basically I have a web page and I want to do A/B testing, and you use generative AI to generate your different variants, and then reinforcement learning to kind of automatically improve your website. That I was like, of course, like that makes so much sense, right? But not only that, he took it in kind of an even further direction to talk about the future of user interfaces and being kind of these type of like generative AI driven, like kind of living user interfaces and everything. And like this is, that's the benefit that we have, like working with founders that are kind of high caliber and ambitious, right? Is that they're not thinking small, right? They're thinking big, right? And they're thinking kind of things have a big impact. A lot of times when you have a kind of an early, like a first time founder or early stage, first time founder, they're thinking about, oh, well, look, I can make a viable business doing this. And it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, but just, I learned this early on. It's like, just because you can solve a problem doesn't mean you should, because your time is very valuable, right? And just, even though you could say, I could solve this problem, right? Or I would see I can build a viable business in this area. But like the truth is, if you are talented and if you're a good engineer, or if you or you have other skills, like there's a lot of things you could do, right? And so what separates people who are very the highly successful people versus like the people who don't never really achieve that level of success, it's often, I mean, it's a little bit about talent, but it's even more so about your taste in problems that you work on, right? And so if you have good taste in problems to work on, like you're much more likely to be to hit those levels of success, right? And so that's often what separates the people who have talent versus the people who are going to be that next level of success, right? And so I think that is some of the benefit. Again, I mean, like what I mentioned in Inception, maybe around 70% or so are serial entrepreneurs, like people have started at least one company in the past, but we have almost 30% that are not. They're first-time founders as well, right? And but we're looking for the people who have that the combination of the talent and the ambition. So like they're not just looking to be like, oh, I could make a viable business in this area, but they're looking to be, okay, we're looking to build the next great company or change the world in these very particular ways. Like that is where that's what we look for and filter for. And and so by curating a group of people that are all like-minded like that, yeah, it ends up being a lot of fun, and there's all these synergies there, because like you just getting those people together who are all about the same stage and and are working in this and are working in similar areas, right? Who are all ambitious, who are all trying to start companies, right? Yeah, there's a lot of positive synergies that happen between those people. And I mean, some of this has been learning over time as well. I didn't really think or anticipate about this, but there was and like whenever you're in any type of program where there's a cohort or there's a group of people together, there is like an opportunity. Sometimes what happens is you get this sibling rivalry type of thing, where it's just like the fact is you see other people and like they are doing well and you know them and you don't want to fall behind. So like it gives you that little bit of extra push to be like, well, I want to keep up. Like I don't want to fall behind. So like I'm gonna push forward as well, right? Like this was something that I did not think about or even anticipate at all. But then there's some aspect of that as well. There's like a not so much directly competitive. Like, hey, we're all we're all being graded on a curve, and like only a small number of us are going to get A's, and like everyone else is going to get B's or C's or whatever. It's not like that. It's much more of like, hey, we're it's like being on the sports team together, right? And it's like we're all pushing each other in the same way, right? Because we're all part of the same part of the same experience, right? And so to do that in a environment where it's more collaborative than competitive, but it's like general competition in terms of like just people inspiring other people to oh well, I should do this too. I saw this so many times happen where one of the Inception companies would launch on Product Hunt, and the other one would be like, I got to launch on Product Hunt too, and then this is like happen again and again, and it becomes this positive feedback cycle, which is just really amazing to be part of. So
yeah,
I see.
And did that happen to you, right? Because you started Redcoat AI from the Inception Studio. And
yeah.
could you tell us, why did you start Redcoat? What does Redcoat AI do? And, why did you decide to start that?
Yeah. So Redcoat AI, so the backstory here. So my first two companies were in cybersecurity, and then so I had a lot of experience in cybersecurity, but also I was pretty convinced like my next company would not be part of cybersecurity. I was looking to like, okay, maybe I can broaden this out, because I knew all the downfalls of like starting a cybersecurity company, right? And but actually what happened was that It was at one of these Inception cohorts, right? Where it's like we're in the early days, I'm still looking for my next thing as well. And so I would join some of the teams and like work with the teams because I mean, part of it is fun and part of it is like I want to explore like different ideas and stuff. And so it was, yeah, I was actually in cohort 3, and then we form up with a team that was there, and then really begin to work on this idea around Redcoat AI. At the beginning, I was like, maybe there's not that much here. And then, but like as we talk about it more, it became pretty interesting. So like basically what we do at Redcoat AI is the LLMs and generative AI. This is the biggest change that I've seen in my career for cybersecurity, just in terms of the implications of it, right? And nothing more so than the area of social engineering. Right. So social engineering in the past, where it's really easy to tell, if somebody is, is send you a scam message because it has misspellings and the bad grammar and like all of this. And so you could usually tell pretty easily. Then now it's like now with generative AI, you can make highly targeted and perfectly fluent attacks, right? Not only with text, but also with voice and now even video. Right. And so this has become very possible. And of course, in every new wave of technology, it's always like scams and porn are like the two areas that like are always the early adopters. Gen AI is no exception there, right? So this is and so a lot of scammers have started to build this I think I'm sure you've seen like smishing and these other type of messages are up, they're up like 1,700% year over year, and like it's really become a real problem, and the quality is getting better and better. And these attacks always existed, but now you can do them at scale. Right, it's kind of the equivalent of like the script kiddie or whatever. It can just using a few Gen AI tools, they can basically run these highly targeted attacks at scale, and people fall for this stuff all the time, right? And so this is where we just thought, this is somebody needs to solve this problem, right? And it's a tricky problem to solve, right? And so so we came up with a solution. It's like a two-part solution. One is we have something called Defender, which will basically help to detect social engineering attacks, like use large language models for good, like use them to analyze text from, it could be from an email, from a text message, WhatsApp, Telegram, whatever, like LinkedIn, anything, right? And we then can classify very accurately like whether this is a social engineering attempt or not, right? And these, and not just looking at keywords, but like really understanding the intent behind the message. And that's really what generative AI gives us, is the fact that yes, you can use it for these bad use cases like generating, fake, like deep fakes and things like that. But you could also use it for good, like basically revolutionize the way that you are doing detection as well, right? So we have Defender, and then we also have one a product called Pretender, which is like the offensive version of this. So basically, you give it anybody's profile, it'll generate a fake version of them that you can use to send text messages, reach out on LinkedIn, also make phone calls to them, and then soon we'll have video there as well. And so this is, and the intent there is kind of like inoculate your workforce. Like you want to protect them against these type of next generation threats. The best way to do that is to show them this is what's possible. And then they will know. And then they know that the next time they receive a phone call that sounds like it's from the CEO, and he's asking you to go buy gift cards or tell them secret information about the company, or wire money or any of those type of things, like they'll know, they'll know, oh actually I should actually go through the appropriate processes, because like just because I heard the voice on the phone doesn't necessarily mean that that was the real CEO, right? Because deepfakes exist and all this, right? And so the both parts are important there. And we just saw like it was mostly about like just there's a tsunami that's coming, like it's like for cybersecurity, and like they're completely unprepared for it. And like we at least understand like what it's a state of the art and what's possible, and like how to actually deploy these things as defense. And it's like we almost felt like compelled to, it's like we have to start this company, right? Because like somebody needs to solve this problem, and we didn't really see any of the incumbents being any type of position to solve it at all, because cybersecurity is a very conservative field. I mean, for good reason. I mean, it's good. It's good that for security you should be, conservative a little bit. But clearly there was just none of the vendors that were in there were anywhere close to be able to like have the right approach to solve this type of problem. But we knew what it took, and so that's where we ended up starting the company there with like co-founders who met at Inception. As well. So it's very meta level, right? So it's like we started the accelerator to kind of find, and then it started our own company out of the accelerator program as well. So
that's amazing. Yeah, and but as a normal people like me, how can I know, oh, this is scam? I can't recognize, oh, this is real John or not, right? And how can I proactively defend these things?
I mean,
right now we are talking so real John, right? Not
well, how do you know?
Real John, right?
I mean, has my name in the corner. I mean, how do you know this is the real me? Well, this is an interesting question, right? And the truth is that, yes, I mean, today for video, like the video generation is not quite perfect, although it's like getting so good. Like, I mean, look at about a year ago. I don't know if you've seen this thing, like the generative AI for like Will Smith eating spaghetti, like video. If you've ever seen that one before, you can Google and check it out. It's really funny, and it's like that was the state of the art about it, whatever, in 2023, like about a year ago or so. And now you compare that to Sora or any of these other like technologies as well, especially for things around like avatar, like a virtual avatar. There is a bunch of off-the-shelf services that you can use now where you don't need much video at all. In fact, like Microsoft has one called Vasa that they built that was all you need is a single image. And for the voice clone, all you need is 3 seconds of audio. And with those, you can create a very convincing like deep fake of somebody talking, right? And it mimics and it gets the expressions right, and it mimics everything. It's just like wow, that is it's really astonishing. Like, and that's the trajectory that we're on. It's like it's not perfect yet, like you can tell a little bit. But I mean, so long ago, like maybe not that long ago, like a year ago, like the best practice thing you do is like, oh, you want to detect a deepfake. You basically say, oh, wave your hand in front of your face or something, right? Or like turn to the side or anything like that, right? Because the deepfake software was not that great, and you kind of like get glitches and stuff like that. It reminds me a lot of like the generative AI, where it's like, oh, you want to find if something generative AI, go count the number of fingers on the hand, and if it's like, because like the Gen AI would always like, you used to get that wrong. But guess what? Now you look at the latest ones, and like it doesn't. It gets that right. I mean, like, because the stuff is so, any type of things you'd say there, like about how to detect it, it's going to become obsolete really quickly, right? And so what we do, we're not focused on whether it's real or fake, right? Because or like AI machine generated or human generated, right? Because the other thing is there's a lot of legitimate use cases for AI generated content, right? I mean, we see these all the time in Inception, and like these are like ones that will handle phone calls for me, or or like even virtual avatars, or give you a personalized video, or any of those kind of things. And like or even in Zoom, right? So there's AI powered features that will say, make my face, like remove my wrinkles, right? Make my face look better. And guess what? Those are like the best ones of those are powered by generative AI. So to say that, like, I mean, in some sense, having me like clean up my complexion and give me more hair and stuff like that, that is a fake. And so it's like, you want to flag that. It's like, oh, that's not real. Technically, yes. But if you want to, I mean, but the point is, like, those are not malicious use cases. You don't care about catching that stuff. Like, the stuff you want to catch is like somebody trying to deepfake the CEO or the CFO to like, and then telling them to wire money, and like, or telling them to kind of give up sensitive company secrets, or like their 2FA code, or like that type of stuff, right? That's what you really care about. And so then, and sometimes those scams are real humans. There's a class of things that are called shallow fakes, where basically it's real video, or it's real audio, or it's a real media, but they just take it out of context. And so it'll pass all the checks. It'll be like, yes, this is real, but like, they because it's taken out of context, then and this is the way that fakes used to work, right? And like before deepfake technology is like they use shallow fake, these type of shallow fake techniques, but they're still very effective, right? And you can trick a lot of people, right? So these are, again, it's like the real versus fake, or rather kind of AI generated versus machine generated is not actually the problem. I think that's important. The real problem is this malicious or not, right? And so that's what we've been focusing on, whether it's a real human or not. I mean, like we do have some detection technology that can detect if that this does look like it was generated by one of the kind of AI, either AI services, AI models, like those type of things. But I think ultimately that's an arms race that like the defenders will lose. And so the better thing to focus on is the actual content and like what are they trying to get you to do, and less about, I mean, and whether it's machine generated or not is just one data point, in that. So
Very interesting. And I saw today, Ilya, the co-founder of OpenAI, raised 1 billion from like notable investors, right? And then he said, he found the mountain something and in safety in super intelligence. Have you seen that?
yeah, no, I mean, part of it is, I mean, obviously with Ilya and the others, like they're that are part of that team, it's a kind of didn't even matter what they were working on. They were gonna definitely, like with a star team like that, especially now, like there's like lots of capital like and lots of interest in AI still, right? It's not like this bubble is not popped. I mean, these are like things are as hot as they've ever been. And there's a lot of interest in that. And so if you have a talented team, kind of doesn't even matter like what you're working on. Like you can probably raise money and a significant amount of money, right? No, that being said, I mean, I think it was like there's a lot of promise around kind of AGI or even ASI, like the kind of artificial general intelligence, or like some people call artificial super intelligence, right? Um, there I'm my view on this is that it hasn't really changed like over the last few years, even with the kind of amazing things that new models can do, because a lot of the stuff there is just kind of parlor trick. It's just like, hey, there was somewhere in the data set, somewhere on the internet, like somebody did something similar, and then and so when you test it out, it's just doing recall. It's just like it's memorizing stuff and it's like spitting stuff back out. And then people was like, well, it's amazing. It was like, well, yeah, that's because it was trained on like the entire internet and every book that's ever been written and all this stuff. And so like in some of these cases, like the generalization is like not quite there. And when you try to kind of ask it questions and things, like if you ever ask it, it's like, oh, ask it to do math questions, and then but like change it from base 10 to some other base, right? Where it's like, and the fact that it's memorized all this stuff, and it completely fails all that stuff because there's not that much in the data set that's like doing things like that, right? So, but that being said, there's also a argument where it's like, well, if it kind of quacks like a duck and walks like a duck, then it is a duck. Like, and what's the difference between if the AIs will consistently pass a Turing test and are able to do, whether it's memorization or whatever, but like it's able to do all these amazing things, like isn't that just intelligence, right? And like, I mean, I understand like the gist behind that argument. I think we're due for like it's a correction that'll happen. Basically, there's a lot of amazing things were promised for AI and agents and all of these, and like and AGI and everything else. That the reality of it is not going to match the what was promised. Like that one, I can pretty much guarantee. Anybody who's worked with these systems knows that they're kind of simultaneously amazing and also like really stupid, right, at the same time. Like the things are like how many R's are in the word strawberry and stuff like that, and it like gives you the wrong answer. So it's like, I mean, like, and that's just one little piece of trivia, but there's a bunch of examples that are like this where it's like, the language model itself is like not even self-consistent in its own answer in the context of the same answer, right? Because it's just spitting out tokens of like that are statistically likely to, you know, that it's seen in its data set, right? So these, and there's a lot of structure in that language and everything like that, that like gives it the ability to do these amazing things. But yeah, I still think we're a long way away from this type of like, you know, full artificial like general intelligence or super intelligence. I mean, even with, and when we do have it, it's going to make, like, the first versions of it are going to be you know, the first versions of this are going to be like just in very particular domains, and like there's not, you know, like I don't think we're going to have like a kind of a breakout moment where, oh, suddenly we have millions of you know, virtual beings that are all like smarter than humans, right? It's not, you know, even just the, like, if you look at like the capacity of like a human brain, and if we like, if you, even if you just use the, like, well, how big of a neural network do you need and how much power you need and all this kind of stuff with the current state of technology, like we're like, you need to build like an entire data center and have it, and like power it by like an entire power plant or something to simulate one of these at the level that like you would want for a kind of human. I mean, we, like, the first step is like get it to be as intelligent as like a cat or something, right? Like that, we're not even there yet, but like it'll, I mean, and that'll take some time, right? And but I do think that there's a, like, the promise that was been made is like there's such a big gap there. Like if people are with a straight face being like, well, we're investing $1 billion in this because we firmly believe that ASI is, we're on the cusp of ASI, and like it's going to happen within the next 2 or 3 years, like they're going to be disappointed, right? Now, but if they're putting $1 billion in this, and because yes, they're gonna like shoot for that, but like in the meantime, they're going to have all these other amazing use cases that are going to like solve all these problems for these people, and like, and create a huge amount of value, then yes, yeah, then that, like that makes total sense. I totally agree with like, that type of thing is going to happen, right? And I think the danger with that, with putting that the conversation so much about either AGI or ASI, is that it just distracts us from what the real dangers are of using this. It's not, the actual danger is not like some superhuman intelligence is going to, you know, try to eradicate humanity, and so we need a magic off switch or something like that to like to turn it off in case it goes rogue and whatever. That's like, that's sci-fi stuff. Like the real danger is that people like humans will use these tools to do bad things, like to do bad things at a scale which like they were not able to do before, right? And like you know, go and create like 1 million sock puppet accounts, and like go and like influence elections, or create deep fakes that will change the, you know, or like those sorts of things, or even things that are maybe not quite as nefarious as that, you know. It's, you know, it's, LLMs are just a tool. I thought, you know, I saw like Andrew Ng, he was kind of a, you know, trying to make this parallel of like, well, it's like an engine. I mean, like an LLM is like an engine, right? You can use engines for, you can put engines and things and like they can be used for good things and like bad things. The good uses overwhelmingly, you know, outweigh the bad uses. But you could use it for either one. I like that is very much, I mean, that's very much the truth. I mean, that's very much the case, that is, and it doesn't make sense to kind of restrict, like unnecessarily restrict like these, you know, the development of this technology when it's like has so many positive outcomes, right? And like, and usually the core issue that it comes down to is like, what's people's perceived likelihood about that this catastrophic event is going to happen, where you know, the AI becomes sentient and then decides to like go and kill its creators or whatever, right? And you know, I think there are people that are, you know, well known in the industry and everything, that believe that is a real risk, and it is true. Like if you actually do believe that's a real risk, then it's kind of like you would go down one particular path. I think the most people, or most people who kind of actually work in this space, not people who are political scientists or philosophers or whatever, but people who actually have used the technology, know what it's capable of, know that it's like we're very far away from that. That is such a remote chance. It was like, I heard it described as like, hey, like I don't worry about that for the same reason I don't worry about overpopulation on Mars, right? Because yes, theoretically yes, but like there are so many other worse problems, and like the chance of that happening kind of anytime soon is really low. And so, yeah, I think that certainly is the case kind of on some of the safety side. But I do think that there is like like the current approach towards LLMs and the next token prediction is not going to be the thing that's going to bring us to AGI or anything close to it. And it's going to require some just fundamental reimagining of how these things work, like with really talented teams and people who do understand things at that level. Then that's the type of work that needs to happen to be able to kind of break through and make things that are much closer to human intelligence.
So, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah.
We need to prepare for it. And so, yeah, we like and we love what you're doing. And so we need to prepare for it, right? So thanks. And yeah, so thank you for talking about like, your like Inception Studio, also, so AI, generative AI. But so, yeah, we are also interested in your career as well. And so we saw your profile page, like biography, so saying like you started coding. So when you were 5 years old, right? And so we were just curious, why you were interested in computer science and AI, and is it really so that you started coding when you were 5 years old?
Yeah, I wasn't interested in computer science. I was for sure. I was like, mostly what happened was that like we had a computer at home, and like we didn't really have any games, or we had like just very few games on the computer, and I wanted to play computer games. And so there used to be these like magazines that would have the listing, like the source code listing in them, and you could type them in, and then you could like play a game, right? And so I would do this, and I would like type it in line by line, right? And of course, and I did this, and this was when I was 5. I was in kindergarten. I was like doing this because I really wanted to play the game, and it was like because I was bored. I was just bored, and I was like, there's this computer here, and it's like, whatever games we had on there were, I got sick of them, and it was like, I was like, oh, this looks like a cool game. Like, let me type in this code and see what happens, right? And of course, like when you type it in, like there'll be typos, like I would make mistakes because I'm just like copying it out of the magazine, and there would be bugs in there. And then I had to learn how to like debug, because it's like I could, at the beginning I would like look character by character. It's like, oh, what did I have a typo or something like that? And then as you do this more and more, you kind of get a little bit of intuition. It's like, oh, well, this part is broken. Okay, well, what part of the code should I look at so so I can kind of find out where my typo is, right? And then of course, like when I did that, I was not satisfied with like just playing the game as it was written. It's like I want to make changes, right? It would start by like, oh, I want to put my name in this here, or I wanted to like add a new feature, or like that kind of stuff. And then so it started off by just like, I'm not really writing code, I'm just like making small changes to like, I change an if, or I change a number, or I change like that kind of thing. I would see like how the result would be. And like that's basically how I got started, right? And then I just kind of I got better and better at it, just as I was learning more and more. But yeah, that was my first that's basically how I got started in coding, I guess, in like programming, right? And then like my first, and so I just did this. I used to run like there's this thing, and once upon a time this thing called BBS, which is basically you have a modem and you can dial in to like these. It's called bulletin board system, right? And then and this was like pre-internet, and you would dial up, and you could like send messages and talk to people and that kind of stuff. And so I used to, and there was a sysop, which is like kind of the system operator of that. And so there was like I got a modem like very early. It was like 1200 baud, which is like everybody else had 300 baud modems. I had like a really fast modem, like 4 times faster than anyone else's. And I would do all these dial up, and it would kind of, I got into that scene for a while, and then I began to run my own BBS for a while, and then I started to like, well, I had some friends who were basically building games for BBSs, and then I was like, well, I'm going to make my own game for this BBS, and I was like, and so I made this whole like kind of RPG game and like that kind of thing. Like this was when I was in high school by that time. I was like, that's what I was doing. Kind of middle school. I started in middle school and then kind of like continued to high school, right? So by the time, actually, yeah, and then like, and that's where I was like, oh, well, now I learned C. Like I started like Pascal, and I learned C, and then I learned like different languages and that kind of stuff. So that's how I got good at it. And then what happened was that I took the AP computer science in high school as a sophomore, which was like, that was the first year they let me do it. Like they wouldn't let me take it as a freshman. So, but they let me take it as a sophomore. And then I ended up doing well in that class. Like I got a 5 on the AP tests and everything. And then my teacher, like the teacher for that class, like clued me in on this thing that was called like USA Computer Olympiad, which was like, it was like a competitive programming thing. And because she knew that I was really good at this, and because like a lot of stuff just came naturally because I just like had been doing it since I was 5 or so. And yeah, and already had kind of a lot of coding experience like through my BBS days and games and everything I've written. So then so I ended up doing those, and like it was like those problems were really, really hard. Like it was like way harder than any other problems I've ever worked on before, but I got really into it. And then yeah, I ended up like going to the like national whatever USA Computer Olympiad as like one of the top 15.
Wow.
I didn't make it to there's one called IOI, which is like the international competition, where only the top 4 from the US end up going. I did not make it in the top 4, but I made it in the top 15. And I think that was like the first time I felt like, oh, I might be good at this thing. Because I never really thought of myself as good at this. That was my first indication. It was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. And that was my first like experience with kind of computer science side. Because until then, I was just doing coding. I wasn't really thinking of algorithms and like stuff like that. But in my preparation for the USA Computer Olympiad, I got this algorithms book, and then I began to read it, and then that's where I just got much more into like the actual kind of computer science side of things and algorithms and everything else, right? Yeah, and then I went to MIT, and then so I got into MIT basically because I was in the USA Computer Olympiad. It was not based on my grades, and like my SAT scores were okay, but not fantastic. And it was because I had done that, the USA Computer Olympiad, and so I got accepted, which is like a miracle because it was like that was my dream school, right? And then I went in, I went to MIT and then in MIT I was able to apply myself much better than I did in high school. And so I ended up doing much, much better. And then that's where I learned about compilers. And I was always interested in like, how does this compiler work? This is like amazing how you can go from source code to like machine code. And it's like, how does that even work? Right. And then I learned about how this worked, and I get so into compilers. I still love compilers. This is my favorite topic area. This is why I taught the compilers class at Stanford multiple times, and this is like it's my first love, whatever. So it's like I could talk about compilers for days with anybody because I really, really love the area of compilers, and I think working on compilers, it forces you to kind of like work on a meta level, and also like just you have to be really strong on algorithms and on implementation, both together, right? You cannot just hack together a compiler. Like you will never make it work reliably enough to like for people who use it, right? But you can't also just work entirely in a theoretical domain on compilers, because ultimately these are running on real computers and real hardware and with real programs. And so you have to understand, how do people write programs? How does architecture work? All that kind of stuff. And so it's like this kind of wedding of these two together, which really attracted me a lot to that problem space, right? And so then
Do you still teach at Stanford, like a compiler?
I don't teach the compilers class currently because now I teach the LLMs class. The 224G, CS224G, which is about building applications using large language models. So although I've taught used to teach the compilers class in the past, and like one of the most amazing experiences was that I got to co-teach the compiler class with Jeff Ullman, who won the Turing Award for his work in compiler education. Like he's one of the authors of the Dragon Book and multiple other textbooks and everything. And so I got to co-teach a class with him. He had won the Turing Award, and then and then I was like, I'm sure. Look, he's not going to come and co-teach a class with me. It's like there's no way. He already hit the pinnacle. It's like, why would he come? But he did. I mean, because he's a great guy, and he loves this stuff as well. I mean, he's obviously kind of, I mean, he's getting up there in years and everything like that. But like he came back. So the year after he won the Turing Award, like we co-taught the class together, which was like, that was a really amazing experience. So like it was just like I never thought I would have a chance to do that like anytime in my life, and that was definitely a high point there, to be able to kind of work on and teach the compiler class at Stanford with Jeff Ullman, which is very cool.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. Yes, thank you for sharing your like life stories of studying code. Also, you also tapped that like topic of like hardware. So right now, so yeah, I mean in AI field, so it's like so competitive, like not only LMNs but so also like cloud tips. So yeah, it's so severe competition. So do you have any like big picture on this, like how it's going, or like which we should focus on?
I mean, is this
Yeah,
kind of like specifically kind of around the hardware area, or like what, or just kind of in software in general, or?
I
hardware
think software,
related to in
yeah,
AI fields. So
in
Yeah,
macroscopic view,
mm,
yeah.
Yeah, no. I mean, look, I mean, there's it's so interesting to see kind of in this machine learning space, like a lot of these topic areas that you hear about, like systolic arrays and even like wafer scale integration and like all and parallelization, all this stuff. This is things that like were like in the compiler space, we work on this in like the 80s or whatever, right? Or even like because a lot of it, like, there's a lot of overlap with scientific computing and these other areas where there just weren't that many compelling use cases. But like a lot of those ideas, they really haven't changed since then. And even on the architecture side, or on the kind of compiler like code generation side either. And so for a long time, like the state of the art in for a long time, the state of the art in with TensorFlow and with and PyTorch and everything else, it was like abysmal. It was like embarrassing. Like the utilization on our GPUs was really low. And like even just to try to get the things to perform well, it was like, and these are things that like it's like as a compilers person, I could like look at this and be like, oh my gosh, like this is like you just use some basic techniques that we've known for the last 20 or 30 years, and we can do a much better job at these. The truth is that like there were just not that many good compiler people that were working in machine learning early on. Now that's totally changed. Now it's like now you have all the smartest people like are all working on these problems, and this is why you're getting like these leaps and bounds of like improved efficiency both on the hardware side as well as on the software side. And this is why like the new capabilities are like just so much better, because there's a lot of catch up that like had to happen there. I think there's NVIDIA. I mean, NVIDIA is like certainly is the de facto leader in this space, like by far, by like, and then I think they just released their latest numbers, and they completely blew out all their numbers, everything.
Yeah.
And it was like, and like their stock price ended up going down because well, you didn't exceed the expectation by as much as we thought you would. It's like, but like, I mean, there was a time where it's like NVIDIA was like was like flirting with being the most valuable company in the world. And for good reason. I mean, just so you look at like that business, it's incredible. They have, and not, it's not on the hardware side as much as even it's on the software side. Look at the entire software stack. Look at CUDA and like they own that whole stack, right? And it's really, really hard for somebody else to come in and basically displace all of that. It's a ton of work, right? Because you have to build not only, yes, you have to have the great hardware, but you also have to have like all the tools and like all the compilers and the things to debug and like and everything else on the in there. And that's a ton of work, and like NVIDIA has been working on it for a much longer time than anyone else, and so like they have a big advantage. Now that being said, I mean like there are some very interesting like new companies that are coming out with like making specialized hardware, especially ones that are optimized for inference and other things that are just like, yeah, this is like 100x or 1000x more efficient. Totally makes sense. I mean, like just knowing the way that architecture works and everything, people could totally build those things. It's not like NVIDIA has all the answers for this. Yeah, it's very possible to build very highly efficient hardware, and I think that some of those companies are going to start to eat into NVIDIA, right? I mean, like NVIDIA is kind of at the top, and they don't really have. They're gonna the only way it is down. I mean, and they're going to start to eat into those. Now, is there any of those is going to have a chance of like displacing NVIDIA like anytime soon? Probably not. There's so much inertia there. It's really, really hard. And I mean, NVIDIA makes a huge margin on their GPUs. It's so much. They make so much money. It's crazy, right? And so even if like some of these competitors just get a small fraction of that, it's still like a lot of money. It's a pretty big market. So I still think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff that's there. It's going to be, but it's going to be mostly kind of on specialized tasks around like particular architectures, particular, for inference and other kind of things. And it'll have like, so I used to work at IBM, right? And there used to be this saying like nobody gets fired for buying IBM. That was because like IBM is always a safe bet, and it's that's not true. I mean, now IBM is not nobody anymore, but now this is true in NVIDIA. Like if you are procuring hardware for machine learning tasks, you're not going to get fired by buying NVIDIA. But you will get fired if you buy one of some other like smaller, more upstart company, and like that ends up failing, and then it's like that's a big catastrophe, right? So like that's it. And so those competitors have to be able to find their edge, and like it seems like their edge is going to be in terms of performance and in terms of power performance as well, like those sorts of things. And they have to be like not just like 10% better, but they have to be like 10x better to be able to jump that gap, to be basically, oh, this is why I'm not going to buy NVIDIA, because this is going to like actually save us so much on our power bill or on our GPU bill or whatever it is, that like it's worth the risk, right? But it will happen. I mean, just because like there's so much money there, and NVIDIA is not going to be able to continue to kind of execute on every axis. They're gonna find some competitors are gonna find some niche, and they're going to end up kind of owning that niche, and like NVIDIA is not going to compete there. And then from that niche, they'll be able to grow to kind of other type of use cases, everything. Yeah. But so I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening on the hardware side, but interesting in terms of just they're finally applying the techniques that we knew about from 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, and they're finally being deployed in actual hardware that will be much more efficient than the GPUs that NVIDIA has.
Yeah, and I saw so many players working in this space, like Grok, Google, OpenAI started, exploring the chips. And then, by the way, do you think OpenAI will keep the same position for let's say in 5 years, 10 years, or other company will, like company come out?
I don't think so. And the reason I say, I mean, so they were the undisputed leader, like without a doubt, for a long time. And then there was like suddenly there's like over time there became some real viable challengers, right? I mean, at the beginning it was like, oh, maybe Gemini, that's going to be it. Okay, but that was clearly not. I mean, they flubbed the launch and everything like that, and it just doesn't work very well, right? And but like you can't ignore Google. I mean, they have a lot of resources. They'll figure it out, right? And then you also have Meta there as well. They have like, I mean, I think Mark Zuckerberg said he's like buying up all the GPUs and stuff. So there's no more GPUs for anyone else. They're a serious competitor there as well. And then Anthropic. I mean, there was big news wherein it's Anthropic's Claude, the biggest Claude Opus, whatever, it beat out GPT-4, and like it like soundly beat out GPT-4. So it's like now it's like they have real competitors there, right? And those are just a handful, and there's other ones as well. Like now we kind of continue to see new ones being developed all the time, and yeah, and like very competitive performance. And the other thing is that there is so it's very interesting. So at Stanford, I remember once upon a time there was when I was teaching at Stanford, like all the best students, they would go to Google or to Facebook or kind of because those are the cool hot companies to go to. And then at some point that changed. And it was like now it was like they were not getting the top tier people. Like they were getting like the second tier people because the top tier people were going to other companies like OpenAI, for example, right? And now, and I think like OpenAI is still like one of the most sought after kind of engineering roles, or like kind of like for talented people in AI. Like it's one of the most sought after. But I'm beginning to see the signs of this changing, where they're due to a variety of factors. It's like the top talent is not going to OpenAI anymore. In fact, like there's like talented people leaving OpenAI because of growing pains and like whatever other things that are happening. I mean, you mentioned Ilya, and like there's others that are like that as well. I mean, like I know Greg Brockman, I know he's on leave, and like there's other things that are like, and I've talked with enough people at OpenAI that like they it's they're experiencing some difficulties right on that side. And I think that like that's a very interesting leading indicator for like what the innovations are going to be happening like 3, 4, 5 years down the line, right? If you're not attracting the very best talent, like either from schools or from wherever, then it's going to be really hard to keep up your innovation edge, like over time, right? And I've started to see this with OpenAI, and because now like what do? They go to start companies, right? It's just like if you are talented and you have skills in AI. This is true at Stanford. This is true other places as well. And your option is like go join a company like OpenAI or Meta or Anthropic or some others, or go start your own thing or join something that's like extremely early stage. Like there's increasingly a number of people that are like going the startup route. And because they want to join like the next OpenAI, they want to join the thing that's going to be the next big thing. And yeah, and so it's so funny to talk about OpenAI as the incumbent, but they are in this space. They're the incumbent, right? Even though it's all very new, but like they're the incumbent in this space. And then because of a variety of factors, a lot of the top talent is not going to the incumbent. It's going to some of the challengers and like the up and comers, right? And so that does not bode well for OpenAI continuing to maintain their edge. I still think they do. I mean, like they do have an edge just because, I mean, there's the stuff they released and fine, like Anthropic has come along and others have come along and kind of have leapfrogged in various ways, but they have stuff that they haven't released yet that they will release, and then they'll leapfrog again. So it'll be competitive for a while, but if they're not in a position where they're attracting the very best talent, they're not going to be able to maintain that. And so this is why I think like 5 years from now, is OpenAI still going to be the dominant player? Maybe not.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, that sounds makes sense. And would you recommend like especially like student to student, would you recommend them like going to the next OpenAI or starting their own company? Because thanks to AI, like we can keep the team small. We can dedicate so many things to AI, but sometimes students don't have enough skill to do something, right? So joining like a emerging company like next OpenAI can get, they can gain the great experience there. So what would you recommend?
So I mean, given the fact that I am, yes, I run a like early stage AI startup accelerator, and like I'm a huge proponent of entrepreneurship and like and startups and everything. I will also have to say it's not for everyone. Like there are people for which like the right thing for them to do is to join OpenAI or join Google or join like whatever, like a larger, more established, more, you know, like a company which is like further along, more stable, especially if you're in a situation where it's like you don't, you know, work is not your life. I guess it'll be like if you want to have like a good work-life balance and you want to, and you feel like you want to prioritize things that are like not your work, then yeah, join a bigger company. I mean, this is going to be like your life is going to be a lot easier there. Like if that's what's important to you, right? Now, that being said, I mean, if you're ambitious, if you are driven, if you really want to make an impact, then either join an early stage company that's kind of like on this rocket ship that you can kind of be part of it the whole time, or just strike out and just go and try to start your own company, and you're going to learn way more for that. Like, it's far better in your early part of your career to optimizing for learnings versus optimizing for, you know, salary or other things, right? Now, I mean but this is all like couched in the you know the question of like, what do you actually want, right? And like what's your ambition, and like what do you want to do with your life? And yes, if you feel like, you know, like work is not the most important thing in your life and like you want to do other things, then yeah, then optimize for those. Like that you're not going to be happy like starting a company where it's like, you know, you're working 80 or 100 hours a week, right? Like where you like to keep the company afloat and survive, right? Yeah, but what I would say is like, if you're just starting out, don't optimize for kind of like, let me build up my ideal resume or anything like that. Like, just try to optimize for, at the beginning, you want to optimize for figuring out what you actually want to do. And if you're successful in figuring out, this is what I like to do, this is what I don't like to do, and you have a good idea of that, then that is like the actual path to happiness and fulfillment. Because you could be on a career path that is like, it's not for you. It's like you're basically on somebody else's career path. And then you may wake up and then fine, you may have like a resume that would match, like pointing towards a direction that like you're not interested in going, right? Because like that's not what you want to do with your life, right? And so like the first step is like figure out what you actually want to do, what actually makes you excited, and like you want to spend your valuable, like, you know, limited time on earth doing, right? And then yeah, and then once you understand that, then you can then craft, you know, the kind of the, you know, think about, well, how do I get to that point, right? Like, so I'm being fulfilled in that way. And for that, usually what it's about is about optimizing for learnings, right? And like, because you know, and so you want to put yourself in a position where you are learning the most that you possibly can, right? And like, and often if working in a big company is, you'll learn some things, but you're not going to learn many things around entrepreneurship. You're not going to, like, the larger the organization, the more narrow your role is within it. So you'll learn how to do that one very particular thing pretty well, but like you're not going to learn about things that are like other things, right? And by the way, like learning the skills to be successful in a company like Google or a large company is a really different set of skills than the skills to be successful at a startup. So different, right? I mean, like, and a lot of the stuff at bigger companies, it's about, well, how do I navigate the politics, and how do I get people on our side, and like, you know, how do I kind of fight for the resources that I need, and like that sort of thing, right? And you know, and much of doing that is like, well, I can't step on other people's toes because that's going to make them mad at me, and you know, it's going to cause problems, and like that is usually what it takes to be kind of successful in a bigger company. Be as successful as a startup founder or in an early stage company is like, the skills there are totally different, right? And so just thinking about that, like, and optimizing for learnings and skills early on. And yeah, and like a very good way to learn is by joining an early stage company and being a key employee there, and then growing with that company. Great way to learn, like get firsthand view of this. And if you're doing it right, then you'll get exposed to things like marketing and like sales and product and all these other areas, and like your learnings are going to be dramatically like accelerated and increased. Or it's just kind of like just jump in the deep end of the pool and just like, okay, I'm going to start a company, and then like you'll be forced to learn, like forced to learn this really quickly, right? I think there is a benefit though in terms of like being able to be in a position where it's like you've seen greatness in some area, right? This is where I think it's hard to be great unless you've seen great in the past, right? And there are different organizations that are great in different things, and different founders and different people who are kind of really great at different things. And so having an opportunity to, for example, work with somebody who is great in an area, and that is an area which is aligned with like your long-term goals, that is an amazing opportunity. Whether that person is at a big company or like that person is a founder and you join their team early, right? Either one is like either of those can be really good opportunities there, right? Yeah, and there's no perfect whatever resume or LinkedIn profile or whatever that that a lot of people think of that and they try to craft it like that, especially like college students, because that's what you need to kind of get into college is like, let me try to put together this resume such that it looks really attractive to like college admissions. After your first job, like nobody really cares. It's just going to be, it's like you don't, it's not going to matter, right? And like what actually matters is like performance there in the real world and everything, right? And so, and not as much like, oh, I had a job here, whatever, right? Like people are going to care a lot less about that as you get later and later in your career. They don't care about what school you went to. They don't care about like what your major was or like your GPA or any of that kind of stuff, right? They care about it maybe for the first few jobs, but after that, it's kind of it's not as important as like what you've done. And so like, yeah, I mean, and I think this is good. This is the way it should be, right? It should be, like it's supposed to be there's supposed to be equity in terms of opportunity, and like, just because, some people were fortunate enough to like have a particular type of upbringing where they had certain type of opportunities, like that should not define their whole course for the rest of their life, right? Just because you're lucky enough to be, in get an internship at this place or go to Stanford or whatever it is, right? There are a lot of talented people at Stanford, definitely, but there are, but if you look across, and then some of the best people I worked with are like, they were like college dropouts, right? And like also extremely good, right? And so these are certainly, I mean, there is some value there. There's some predictive value there in terms of like they have a high filter and all this, but it is by no means a case that like everybody who goes to Stanford or MIT for that matter or any other school is a good, high quality, right? Is not the case, right? There's lots and lots of counter examples to this, right? And so yeah, and what it means is even if you're a high school dropout, like there's like, if you work hard and hustle and like and prove yourself and stuff like that, it's something you can get those kind of early opportunities, and like those earlier learning opportunities, then yeah, then you can end up being successful in this. Look at, I mean, and mentioned Gray. I mean, he didn't even graduate. He didn't finish his. He was like a semester away from graduating at MIT, and he never got his degree. So like he's like, I mean, he has a high school diploma. So Greg Ruckman has a high school diploma, right? And he never got his he never finished his MInge because he left like a semester before because he didn't need to, right? It doesn't matter. So I mean, there's lots of examples that are like that. I mean, you would assume that, oh, he's a PhD or whatever, right? Not the case, right? He did go to MIT, but like he dropped out to basically start Stripe, which is like totally the right decision, obviously, right? Right. And then yeah, and like hasn't looked back at it since then. So yeah.
That makes sense and exciting. And then so you are a 3-time cybersecurity founder, right? Like a successful founder. And so what, looking back now, like, do you have something you would have done differently? You do differently? What's the biggest learning through your founder life? Or pitfalls, or
Oh,
challenges you went over?
oh my gosh, I have tons of them. Like there's,
Yeah.
I mean, especially first company, I made so many mistakes, and I have like all these battle scars of like doing things the wrong way. I would say like the biggest ones is like, just because somebody's willing to give you money for something does not mean it's a good idea. You can't like rely on investors, like to have any type of calibration about knowing like what is a good idea or not, right? And yeah, and so because like there's this image of like, oh well, this famous investor invested in this, therefore this must be a great opportunity, a great idea. Like, no, I mean, like more often the investors, they don't have the answers. I mean, like the founders are actually living it. They live in the space. They know, they are the world's experts in this, or should be, right? And so so don't get enamored by big names or anything like that, because like they invest in a lot of stupid stuff, right? And like and if your thing is one of those stupid things, it's like your time is worth more than their money. So like you should think about that, right? Another one is like making sure that like when you have investors, that they are they understand what you're doing, and they're well aligned, and they're supportive, right? And if they don't really know what you're doing, then this is going to lead to all sorts of problems down the road, right? And if they're not really aligned with like what your strategy should be and all this stuff, or they're kind of not supportive in different ways, like these are not, life's too short. Like don't waste time like working with people like that. Like just try to find the idea and then the investors that are going to actually be well aligned and supportive and really and understand what you're doing. They're not going to have the answers, but like you want to be able to go to them and say, hey, we need help with X, and like they'll like jump at the opportunity to help out. Like those are the people that you want on your side. Yeah. And also it's like be careful about like who your co-founders are. I mean, just kind of like understand, like make sure that you have like good complementary skill sets, but like mutual respect there becomes really important, right? Because if there's a question about like who's responsible for what, it leads to all sorts of problems and issues down the road. And there has to be mutual respect. It can't be like, you have to be able to trust. They'd say, I'm going to fully delegate this part of the whatever, this part of the business, or the the founding roles to this person, and you have to be able to fully trust that they are that they're going to do this better, not only better than you could, but better than people that you would hire or anything else, right? And if you can't answer, if you don't believe that to be the case, it's unlikely to work out. Because I mean, sometimes you have a thing, it's like we have a senior founder, you have a junior founder, and it's like there's a clear hierarchy there, but still like those type of situations just get really, really difficult. The best scenario is that you have complementary skills but mutual respect, like that each person respects the other person for the contributions that they're making, right? Because a lot of companies struggle with just co-founder issues, right? And like issues between the co-founders. And on that topic, kind of like, yeah, and kind of find somebody who's a little bit different than you, not like, there's benefits to doing that. It's not strictly required, but like it's a lot easier if you kind of early on in the DNA of your company, you kind of have some kind of diverse set of DNA. Because like the further along that you go with the kind of all the same DNA in the company, it becomes harder and harder to adjust in the future, right? And then that is, yeah, and that leads to problems, right? I mean, like the best companies are not like, the best companies is not like you take the founder and you basically, genetically, whatever, clone the founder like 50 times, and those are the 50 employees in the company. Like that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes it'd be like, oh, I wish I had like just a bunch of clones of me, so like I could go do all this extra work. But that's not the actual path to the strongest companies, the best companies. Because the reason you start a company is you want to build something bigger than you could do yourself, right? And the only way to do that is by incorporating other people with other skill sets and other perspectives, and like that's how you're going to end up with a product and a company that is better than you could have done by yourself, right? Or even like 50 clones of yourself could have done, right? Yeah. And so, being conscious about that and like going a little bit outside of your comfort zone and so yeah, this person is a little bit different than me, but I know that they're very good at like what they do, and I know they're kind of world class in this area. So, and even though this is a little bit uncomfortable, like let's work together, or like I'm gonna hire them, or I'm gonna like be a co-founder, like that sort of thing. Like those, I think it's good to do those type of situations, even though it might be a little bit uncomfortable, because it's always easier to be like, oh, like, I'm an engineer. It's like, oh, with other engineers, and we all talk engineer language, right? Whatever, right? We get each other, right? And so like, there's some benefit to that, but there is but like there's some downsides as well in terms of as the company grows, right? And I guess the one last thing is like, don't, yeah, I think there's a stigma against solo founders. I don't know why. I mean, I think there are pros and cons to being a solo founder. I mean, like I mentioned, it'd be like, hey, look, you want to have more diverse DNA in there. I mean, like it's easier to do that with more than one person, right? On the other hand, you avoid a lot of drama and a lot of other problems by just having a solo founder, being a solo founder. And there's a lot of challenges there, like in terms of a lot of the challenges of being a solo founder is things like, um, it's a very lonely job, and you don't really have somebody to kind of, like bounce your ideas off of, or like, or be your psychologist or whatever, like, that sort of thing, which is all true. But like there are ways to supplement that, like in terms of just, you don't necessarily have to have like a co-founder to do that. And so yeah, it's not, I know it's not typical, but like having no co-founder is better than having a bad co-founder. So if that's your option, or even a mediocre co-founder, right? Like if those are your options, like, I mean, you can like, don't be afraid of like starting, like saying, you know what, I'm gonna start this company myself, even if you haven't never done it before. This is where some of the things like community can really help, because it like kind of gives you this unfair, advantage, because you can take advantage of the hive mind of like, a lot of other people have been through it before, and like it makes things a lot easier when you do that. It's yeah. So like there's don't, if the right answer is to be a solo founder, don't be like, well, YC never accepts solo founders, so like I'm not going to be a solo founder. Like this is not, like you look at the actual stats, like there's like quite a few of these like very highly successful companies like were actually solo founders or de facto solo founders there. And so it's very possible to be successful there, and raise money and do everything else that you need. And it does avoid a lot of like it has some set of challenges, but it also avoids another set of problems as well. You're talking about like, a lot of times like the critical path is like the communication bandwidth between the co-founders. And so in the case it's one person, like the communication bandwidth is like your cerebrum, like, it's like it's in the same brain. So you really can't get much more efficient than that, just in terms of like, make sure the founders are on the same page. Well, if it's only one, like that problem becomes really much easier when there's only one founder, etc. So yeah, those are some of the things that I've kind of learned over time. But yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, and like this is why I think I'm in a privileged space as well. Through Inception, I get a chance to work with a lot more founders. And so that has also like really accelerated my thinking, not only from my personal experience, but like through just working with a ton of different founders, like through Inception. And I get to accelerate my learning on that side. So that's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think we should all apply to Inception Studio. Yeah, that's a great place to go. And yeah, thank you for that. And so yeah, I think time is running up. And so this is the last question, a big question. And so since, Glasp is a platform where people are sharing what they are reading, learning as a digital legacy, and we want to know what legacy or impact do you want to leave behind or for the future generations?
That is a big question. You know,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, it's you know, I don't know. I mean, since I was young, I felt like there's okay. I was born and I had like there's some type of things I'm talented at and like some things I'm good at. And there's also things where people have made a big investment in me, right? In terms of like, I mean, yeah, I went to MIT and there's a bunch of instruction and a bunch of tuition there. I went all the way, I did a PhD. I mean, like not that many people go in that many years of schooling, right, to go through things, right? And so because of all of this, like the combination of my like the talents I feel like that I have that and as well as you know the kind of what's been like the schooling and other kind of learning and stuff that I have, I feel an obligation that like I have to like go do some good for the world, right? Because otherwise I feel like this is a waste. Like there was that whatever in terms of genetics or other type of investment, it'd be like that was a wasted investment. And it's like it's my obligation to humanity in general as like I should kind of contribute you know in the ways that I in a positive way, right? In the ways that I should that I that you know somebody who was given the gifts and benefits that I was able with that I got and was able to have access to, like I have an obligation to help other people as well, right? So and then that and hopefully that's what is. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be at the kind of life stage where I'm able to do that now. I mean, through Inception Studio is one piece of that. Through teaching at Stanford is another piece of that, and like other things as well that I try to do. And so hopefully that will like eventually be my legacy. I'm like, I'm like, you know, whatever, 0.001% of the way there so far. I still got a long way to go. But you know, yeah, I mean, if it's time where it's going to be, you know, I'm in the latter years of my life and I'm kind of looking back and saying, you know, hey, was I fulfilled? Like, was this a fulfilled life? You know, and that I think is it's the piece that's the most important to me, or at least for now. I mean, maybe when I get older, I'll get more a different perspective, you know, on what's actually important and stuff. But I mean, for now, and this is and like, you know, I mean, that includes, I mean, it includes for my family and my kids, but also like, but to other people as well. You know, just having just a really positive impact and making the world better in all the ways that like I feel like I can contribute. So
Very beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for all the answers and sharing the insight, through your life and experience. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. This is it was a lot of fun. So like I hope the recording turns out well and yeah and I'm looking forward to seeing it.